Before I can start showing you how to build this super sweet lean-to off the back of my house, a little background story is in order. Shown here is the state of things before any work has begun. There are three big issues that needed sorting out before I could start on building the lean-to. First, the existing cement patio was crumbling and way too small. This was solved by spending $4,000 and having a new slab poured. Second, the two smaller windows were original from the 70s, made of wood and rotten. I was able to get replacement windows made from a local building supply place for $400 each and replace them myself without much fuss. Lastly was this huge bay window that sticks out even further than the already cantilevered second floor, which had to be removed and reconstructed. I cut the cantilevered floor joist back and added a rim joist to make the whole outside flush for the lean-to structure to attach to. Getting rid of this bay window also meant I could put a smaller window in its place and add R20 insulation in the new wall structure below it. This simple change, along with the fact that my bay window was rotten, was immediately noticeable in my air conditioner's ability to keep the upper floor cool in these hot summer days. Anyways, with those things in order and my hot tub delivered, it was time to start on the lean-to. So the first step was done off camera, which was to cut back the siding and apply a blue skin flashing under where we were now going to attach the 2x6 ledger. My dad and I aligned both 2x6 boards by sighting down them and keeping everything in place with some 3-inch screws. We then permanently attached the two ledger boards by drilling pilot holes for two 6-inch lag bolts all the way into each of the cantilevered floor joists. Next, we installed all the 2x6 joist hangers. Now, the two outside hangers were special ones with the nailing edges on the inside, as obviously the regular ones wouldn't work here. We simply used a 2x6 scrap to hold the hanger into shape while driving in hanger nails to every available hole. We then laid out the beam location with a chalk line, which was 12 feet off the brick of the house. I measured and marked the 5 post bracket locations, which are evenly spaced apart from one another. I traced the hole locations of the brackets and used an SDS drill to install a 1/2-inch wedge anchor in the center. 4 smaller holes were drilled around the outside to accept tap cons, which can hopefully stop the bracket from twisting when inevitably the post propellers on me. I then marked the center on the bottom of the 6x6 post to drill out clearance space for the nut and bolt of the wedge anchor so the post sits flush on the bracket. My dad held the post while I set up a laser level at the bottom of where the 2x8 beam will connect to the 5 post. This mark will show where the half-lap joints end on each post, and with the concrete being ever so slightly off, each post is now marked to its specific location. At the miter saw with the depth stop set, I make the first base cut from the laser level marking. I then mark the side of the half-lap joint and cut it out on the bandsaw. If you don't have a bandsaw, a great option is to mark both sides and use a circular saw to cut 90% of the way through. Then I finish the cut with a handsaw or reciprocating saw or a bandsaw. Lastly, for the post, I cut them to length, which is 1 inch short of the top of the beam to make room for the J-channel in later steps. Now onto the beam, which I chose to make out of a pair of sistered 2x8s that are glued together with construction adhesive and secured with 2.5-inch screws. I chose to have the 2x8s overlap each other in the middle instead of both sides landing on the center post to add more tensile strength to the beam, as it's already overbuilt with 5 posts supporting it. We laid the beam away from the post brackets and placed the post half-lap joints on it. I drilled pilot holes for the 6-inch GRK screws that hold the post to the beam in an effort to avoid splitting the wood. We only attached the outside and center posts for now to reduce weight, as lifting it was already pretty damn heavy for 2 guys. Once we got it raised up, I added 2 diagonal braces to make sure it couldn't fall on us. After that, we added the other 2 posts and secured all 5 posts with 4 GRK screws each. The bottom post brackets were fastened with 2.5-inch construction screws, and the edges were peened on the rounded corners of the posts so no one gets caught on them. At the miter saw set to 8 degrees, I cut both sides to length of the 2x6 rafters. I then dry fit the first rafter and used 1/2-inch piece of plywood to mark the bird's mouth, which is then cut out with the jigsaw. The rafter is set into the hanger and all nails are added. The beam end is attached by toe nailing 3-inch screws to both sides. The rafters were attached on both ends and then the center to keep the beam from moving around. The rest of the rafters were more the same, hammering nails and driving screws. I then added L brackets to each side of the rafters, as hurricane ties would have stuck down onto the beam and been visually ugly. With my dad taking the day off, I put up the rafter rim with the help of a clamp. This rim was secured to each rafter with 3 3-inch screws. To attach the 2 rims together, I used an off-cut 2x6 and drove in 6 3-inch screws. It was at this point a freak rainstorm decided that I was done working for the day. Next was time to install the purlins for the roof. I chose to go with 2x4 purlins as they add a lot of strength to the structure over 1x4s, and they gave me that extra height that I needed for my off-the-shelf fascia to fit later. The lean-to is 12 feet deep, so purlins are equally spaced every 2 feet with ones at the front and back respectively. I staggered the joints on each row, which received blocking to reinforce the joint, and every attachment point got 2 3-inch screws. Now onto roofing, which begins with installing the drip edge along the front edge. These overlap one another and get secured with roofing nails. Next, the custom bent rake flashing is added to each side, again with roofing nails. I then had a way more difficult time than anticipated tucking the flashing under the existing siding as it kept getting caught on the styrofoam behind it. Before the first sheet of metal could go on the roof, I needed to cut off the high outside ridge as I would need the flat section up against the rake flashing so that it could compress properly into the butyl tape. After adding the butyl tape, we slid the first piece up to the top and carefully positioned it, as once placed on the tape it really doesn't ever want to move again. I then began the process of drilling the rubber washer color matched steel roofing screws into each purlin at every valley of the roof next to the peak. The bottom row of screws will be added later. After the first sheet sucking to drill each hole, I decided to drill through each of the sheets stacked on top of one another, and man, this was the best thing possible. Just make sure you're 100% about these hole locations or you're going to have a bad time. Before adding the second roof sheet, I laid down the upper gasket, which has pre-applied glue to the underside. The second and third sheets were installed in the same fashion. I then slid the flashing down over these 3 sheets, and the fourth sheet needed to be placed before I could screw down the flashing through the peak of each sheet. From this point on, it's simply rinse and repeat. However, at some point I decided to add a screw through the overlapping peaks of each sheet into the purlin, which made a huge difference in the tightness of the joints. The last sheet needed trimming to fit again, and I used a $25 Amazon sheet metal cutting drill attachment, which worked awesome. After forgetting to film the last sheet being installed, I moved on to adding the lower gasket. The last row of screws could then be added, and the roof portion of the build was complete. Now on to adding 2 additional 6x6 posts, which will support the roof in the event of catastrophic failure, but mostly they exist to attach a privacy wall and screen door to. I stood the post up, leveled it, and marked the angle for a half-lap joint. At the miter saw with the depth stop set, I make the base cut. Then using my circular saw and reciprocating saw, remove the bulk of the material. This joint, however, needed mild cleanup work with a chisel. After marking the post base, I could once again attach the bracket to the cement with another 1/2-inch wedge anchor and tap cons around it. I set the post on the bracket after drilling out clearance for the bolt on the bottom and clamped it in place. The post was attached to the bracket with more 2.5-inch screws and the corners were peened over. I removed the clamp and added 5 3-inch screws through the rafter into the post. I then added blocking around all sides of the post. This is semi-structural, but mostly was done to give me a nailing edge for the J-channel later. I then attached a 2x6 post to the house with long tap cons at 4 points. This post is 1 inch short of the roof to leave room for the J-channel. I started the ceiling soffit install with adding J-channel along the beam. It's simply nailed to each rafter while pressed against the beam. You can now see why that 1-inch gap was required at each post. The short joint landed between the rafters, so a screw was added into the beam to stop flexing. I then added J-channel around the 2 center posts, making sure to miter the corners so it looks extra fancy. Now onto installing the soffit, which I once again was able to recruit my dad for his much needed help. We then started with a full piece, which tucked right into the J-channel and ended right on a rafter, so it was super easy to nail down. A second full sheet was added, but then was left with about a 2-foot section to be cut for the end. The key is to go very slow when cutting vinyl soffit, or it will explode in your face. Every row after this is staggered, either starting with the 2-foot piece or a full piece. I used a roofing nail gun to attach the soffit, as by hand would have sucked. Now you might say that the nail gun drives the nail too deep so it can't expand and contract and will distort on you. But my opinion is that it's in a covered area that the sun won't hit, so expansion should be kept to a minimal. In my 2 months of living with this, where temperatures have gone from 100 to 40 degrees some nights, there's been no distortion to speak of. And to answer your question, yes, I did have to stand in the hot tub to nail the middle pieces on, and no, I don't have footage of it. The last piece of soffit is simply secured by clicking into place and hasn't shown any signs of wanting to fall out. To install the 8 2-inch pot lights, I used a hole saw to drill a hole, connect the power supply, and pop them in the hole. The wiring was done off camera. Now on to installing the fascia. The 2 of the 3 front pieces need their respective corners bent around the side. This is easy with some tin snips and a little finesse. The side fascia piece needs a small notch cut out around the 2x8 beam. Bending the cutout over and flattening leaves a cleaner look than simply cutting it flush. My lovely wife then assisted me with installing the fascia by first tucking it under the rake flashing and aligning the beam cutout section. We pressed the underside of the fascia tight while driving in white screws to the lower section and brown screws through the rake flashing, through the fascia, and into the purlin behind. The front fascia was a little tricky to get under the drip edge as I may have forgot to leave a little gap, but with the help of some wood shims we got it in there. I only attached the front 3 fascia pieces with lower white screws as I found it unnecessary to add screws through the drip edge. And with that, the lean-to is complete and you can stop right there. However, I'm now going to install a privacy wall around the hot tub. I start by attaching the outside 2x2 material to the center of each 6x6 post. Then at the miter saw, I can cut the length of vinyl fencing, which cuts just fine and no chipping. I then started stacking up the tongue and groove fencing, while every few rows adding a clamp to one side so it didn't collapse on my face. With the top board in place, I push the 2x2 back into the corner and drive 5 3-inch screws to hold the fence in place. Clamps are then taken off the other side and another 2x2 is secured to the post. That fence ain't going nowhere. The same was done for the next 3 fence sections, however I did have to level and scribe the concrete each bottom board. As you can see, this last section has quite a slope to it. And that's where I'm going to end this one, guys. I have plans to add a stainless steel screen, wall, and door to the remaining openings, but that will be done next year, and I want to get this video to you now. So thanks for watching, leave a like, and we'll see you next time.